I do rise to address this motion, the matter of urgency, that the United Nations Resolution 2758 of the 25th of October 1971 does not establish the People's Republic of China's sovereignty over Taiwan and does not determine the future status of Taiwan in the United Nations, nor Taiwan's participation or Taiwanese people's participation in UN agencies or international organisations. Now, this is urgent because of the growing risk to the security and the stability in the Indo-Pacific. And one of the key risks in this whole process is the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. It's important not just for the human rights of the 23.5 million people in the democracy that is Taiwan, but the impact that decreasing security and conflict there would have on the rules-based order that underpins peace and security around the world, but also the global economic impact, which Australia would not escape, and people like David Uren in a paper in ASPI highlighting that Australia's GDP would go back by 6% and per capita take-home pay would decrease by 14% if there were conflict across the Taiwan Strait. So what does a 1971 resolution in the UN have to do with these risks? Well, if we go back to documents from the time, the National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, speaking with the Premier of China, Zhou Enlai, established the fact that the PRC was concerned that what was then known as the Albanian Resolution did not mention Taiwan. It did not address the status of Taiwan. It did not establish PRC sovereignty over Taiwan, and it did not determine Taiwan's participation in international bodies. So that is in accordance with Australia's One China policy, and many countries similarly have a policy that recognises the original intent of that motion, as opposed to what the PRC call their One China principle, which they have since that time sought to impose. Now, what does that look like for Australia? Well, we see in 2018 Qantas, along with 36 airlines around the world, being coerced by the PRC to change how Taiwan and Taipei were listed on their websites. We see the Marriott Hotel coerced into changing their practice. We see pressure placed upon UN bodies such as the World Health Organization to limit the ability of Taiwan to participate. We see the UN Legal Office for Taiwan Affairs changing their language from the original intent, which included the ambiguity, to adopting the PRC narrative. We see the UN refusing accreditation to civil society bodies and NGOs that don't toe the line on the PRC narrative. We see universities in Australia coerced and pressured by the PRC to adopt their narrative because of funding for institutions and student bodies, etc., that are there. We also see at events such as the Kimberley initiatives, the dealing with diamonds, etc., the Kimberley process, we see unruly and unprofessional behaviour by Chinese representatives seeking to shut the process down until Taiwan's representatives are excluded. This rewriting of history is what George Orwell foresaid when he said, if you can control the past, you can control the future. Cognitive science indicates a thing called the illusory truth effect, that if you say it often enough, people will start to believe it, which means that the perception of truth will increase and therefore potential increase for legitimacy. Now, that also increases the risk of conflict, and the stakes of that conflict are high. So if the PRC wins acceptance of its position in the international community on this matter, then Taiwan's security and the status quo in the Taiwan Strait are at increased risk. The PRC will continue to advocate and claim that legally and politically it would be lawful for them to use force to achieve unification. The PRC would argue that measures by the international community to prevent or deter that are unlawful. And more broadly, acceptance of the PRC's views on the legal meaning and impact of Resolution 2758 would weaken the UN's integrity and increase challenges to the international rules-based order. In the interest of peace, security and stability in our region, it's important and urgent to restore both the status quo for the peoples of Taiwan with respect to engagement in international bodies, but also to restore an accurate understanding of the original scope and intent of UN Resolution 2758.